The chapel was so quiet, even the silence had weight. Outside, the Charleston wind rustled through Spanish moss and oak trees, but inside, time had stopped. The soft hum of the organ faded. Conversations had long died out. What remained was the rustle of black fabric, the occasional sniffle, and the sound of breath held a little too long. At the front of the room, beneath a cascade of white lilies and framed by flickering candles, lay Cordelia Whitmore, elegant even in death. Her silk dress shimmered like moonlight, her hands folded neatly across her chest, her face peaceful, too peaceful. Claire stood toward the back near the aisle, frozen in place. It had been hours or minutes she didn't know. Grief distorted time. All she knew was that her heart thudded too loudly and her hands were cold despite the southern heat. She wasn't watching the casket. She was watching him, Martin Hargrove, her stepfather, Cordelia's second husband. The man who, for over a decade, had called Claire sweetheart and kiddo. The man who always smelled like expensive aftershave and said things like, "Don't worry, I've got it covered." And today, at his wife's funeral, he smiled. Not a smile of sadness, not a trembling lip holding it together kind of smile. No, this one was subtle, controlled. His lips curved just slightly as he shook hands, nodded graciously, placed a hand on someone's shoulder. A flicker of charm danced across his face, the kind you might see at a boardroom meeting, not a funeral. Claire's breath caught. She blinked slowly, unsure if she had imagined it. But then she saw it again, the smile. Not on purpose, but not by accident either, like a mask slipping back into place. She scanned a room. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe no one else wanted to. That was Martin's magic, his danger. He never looked evil. He looked safe, the perfect Southern gentleman. Claire's mind drifted back to all the moments that now felt too neat, too rehearsed. The way he handled the hospice paperwork after her mother fell ill, how quickly he arranged the burial plot, how he didn't let Claire help choose the dress for the funeral. "It's what your mother would have wanted," he said. How would he know? She knew her mother. Cordelia was detail-obsessed. She would have left instructions. There would have been a file. There always was. Claire felt the first twinge of something worse than grief. Suspicion. Martin turned then, catching her gaze across the chapel. And he did it again, that damned smile. He tilted his head like a man greeting a friend at brunch. Claire didn't smile back. Instead, her stomach turned. There was a weight in her chest, like something was pressing inward, warning her. Her mother wasn't even in the ground yet, and Martin already looked like he was celebrating something. And that was the moment Claire would remember later. Not the flowers, not the music. Not the speech. No, it was that smile. That was the moment she realized something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. The house had never felt so hollow. The guests had gone. The flowers had begun to wilt. And yet the air still carried the scent of lilies, sweet, suffocating, and clinging to every wall like a ghost that refused to leave. Claire wandered the halls of her mother's home barefoot on the cold wood floors. Her black dress clung to her like sorrow itself, and every step echoed like a question. Why does this house feel more like his now than hers? She paused outside the office, Cordelia's office, the one room Martin rarely entered. Claire stepped in. Everything looked exactly as her mother had left it. Books arranged alphabetically, pens perfectly aligned on the desk, and the mahogany file cabinet locked, always locked. Her mother once said, "The things that matter most don't belong in plain sight." Claire reached under the desk where she remembered the spare key was hidden, taped beneath the third drawer. Click. The lock released with a soft snap, but the sound might as well have been thunder in that stillness. Inside, rows of folders, neatly labeled: financials, property deeds, insurance policies. She pulled the one marked Whitmore Estate Private and placed it gently on the desk. The first few pages were familiar bank records, trust funds, signatures in her mother's graceful script. But then, halfway through the stack, a name, Vivian Lockhart, and beside it, a bank transfer, $850,000. Claire stared at it. The name burned into her brain like hot metal. She didn't recognize it, not from family, not from any business her mother had mentioned, and yet that name chilled her blood. It wasn't just the name. It was the way it was hidden, wedged between documents that had nothing to do with personal affairs. Claire flipped faster now. Lease agreements, Paris, New York, Geneva, jewelry invoices, hotel receipts for suites Cordelia never stayed in, all signed in Cordelia's name. But Claire knew. Her mother had never stepped foot in any of those places. Claire leaned back in the chair, hand over her mouth. The office, the one that once smelled like paper and lavender, now smelled like betrayal. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that whispers. And Vivian Lockhart was only the beginning. The office door creaked. Claire didn't look up right away. Her fingers were still gripping the transfer slip with Vivian Lockhart's name on it. Her heart was racing, but her face was calm, too calm. Then she heard it. That voice, that tone. That word, sweetheart. Martin Hargrove stood in the doorway like he owned the light spilling in behind him. He leaned casually against the frame, his shirt sleeves rolled, his expression unreadable. "You digging through those old files again?" Claire didn't answer. She laid the slip down on the desk like it might burn through her skin. He took a few steps and, jangling his keys, as always, humming, like nothing was wrong, like $60 million hadn't disappeared into thin air. And he smiled, that same practiced smile from the funeral. But this time she didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Who is Vivian Lockhart?" The question came out so calmly it startled even her. Martin froze, just for a second. But in that second, Claire saw everything. The flicker of recognition, the flash of fear, the twitch in his jaw. His eyes dropped to the paper on the desk. Then the lie rolled off his tongue like oil on water. "Business contact," he said too quickly. "Just complicated deals you wouldn't understand." Claire pushed the document across the desk. "Don't tell me it's complicated. Not when nearly $60 million disappeared under my mother's name." He didn't touch it. His hand hovered, then retreated. The silence in the room swelled, pressing against the bookshelves, crawling up the oak walls. Claire could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, but her voice still steady. "You thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd never look, but I did, and now I know." Martin's smile cracked, just slightly, his charm, his control, fracturing like thin ice under weight. He stepped forward. Claire stood her ground. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. His voice was low, threatening, but she saw it, the fear, behind the arrogance, behind the voice that used to tuck her into bed and pour her orange juice on Sundays. Now that voice was trembling. And for the first time, Claire wasn't. After Martin left the room, Claire didn't move for a long time. She just sat there, her fingertips still resting on the edge of the transfer slip with Vivian Lockhart's name. Her mind was spinning, but her body was frozen. She could still hear his voice, smooth and venomous, echoing down the hallway. "You don't know what you're talking about." But she did. She knew enough to keep going. She turned back to the file drawer, and this time she didn't hesitate. She opened every folder her mother had labeled private, restricted, do not touch. She touched all of it, and that's when the paper cuts began to bleed. Claire found the first offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands, the beneficiary Vivian Lockhart, but the sender, the account holder who funded it, was Cordelia Whitmore. Or at least, that's how it looked on paper. The statements dated back years, not months, years. The amounts started small, $20,000, $35,000, but then they grew, $250,000, $480,000, $1.1 million. Everything had a note, for consulting, real estate holding, interior design services. Claire's jaw clenched. Her mother didn't own property in France, or Brazil, or South Africa, but Vivian Lockhart did. The jewelry invoices were next. One caught her eye immediately. A white diamond bracelet priced at $67,500, ordered 3 months after Cordelia had been hospitalized for chemo. The name on the receipt? Cordelia Whitmore. The signature? Claire squinted. It looked almost like her mother's, but the C curled the wrong way. Her stomach sank. Someone had forged her mother's name. She kept digging. Luxury watches, custom art, a summer home in Santorini, all registered to Vivian, all paid from accounts in Cordelia's name. There was a pattern now, a method, and worse, a system. Martin hadn't just stolen. He had been laundering his betrayal carefully, quietly, beautifully, through the name of a dying woman. Claire's hand trembled as she reached the final folder. Inside was a receipt for a lease renewal in Geneva, and attached to it, a photo. Martin, in a white linen shirt, on a balcony by the harbor, his arm wrapped tightly around a woman with auburn hair and a champagne flute in her hand. The back of the photo had a note, "Vivian loves the Geneva sunsets." Claire dropped the photo. The man in that picture didn't look like a grieving husband. He looked like a man who got away with it. Until now. Claire had seen enough numbers to make her head spin, enough bank transfers and forged invoices to make her want to scream. But nothing prepared her for the photo. It was tucked between pages in a file marked Cordelia Deferred Payments. The paperclip had rusted slightly, like it had been sitting there for years untouched, forgotten, or hidden. She slid it out carefully. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded. But the image was clear. Martin wearing a crisp white shirt smiling, standing on a balcony that overlooked a quiet harbor at dawn. And next to him, Vivian Lockhart, auburn hair tied in a loose braid, resting her head on his shoulder, like she belonged there. Claire's fingers trembled. She turned the photo over. In her mother's familiar handwriting, or something dangerously close to it, was a short note, "Vivian loves the harbor sunrise." Claire blinked. It wasn't the message that crushed her. It was the intimacy of it, the casual softness, the way the handwriting curled at the end of sunrise, the way Vivian was written like she was someone dear, someone known. But Cordelia had never mentioned her, not once. Claire clenched the photo, trying not to let her breath hitch. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about stolen money anymore. It was about stolen trust, stolen years. She laid the photo down and kept digging, and what she found next sent a chill through her spine. 5 other folders, each labeled with a name, each linked to another woman. Angela Morrison, Rachel DeMarte, Elena Soto, Lillian Reed, Sarah Klein. Claire opened them one by one. Each folder had receipts, property deeds, jewelry invoices, and fake consulting agreements. Each woman had been gifted tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars from Cordelia's estate. Martin had done this before. He hadn't just made one mistake. He had built a pattern, a blueprint, a career out of betrayal. Claire couldn't breathe. How long had this gone on? How much of her mother's love had been wasted on a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a vault? And then the realization came. These weren't documents. They were ghosts. Each receipt, each forged signature, each glowing transaction trail, every one was a whisper from the past, a warning her mother never got to say aloud, until now. And Claire wasn't just reading them, she was listening. The ghosts were louder now. They didn't whisper anymore. They screamed in silence, in receipts, in photographs, in lies. Claire sat at her mother's desk, hands trembling over folders that smelled faintly of lavender and betrayal. Papers scattered around her like pieces of a life she no longer recognized. She should have felt rage, But what came first was guilt, a heavy, suffocating guilt, because she had promised her mother something sacred. It had been a rainy afternoon, 6 months before Cordelia died. Claire had brought chamomile tea into her room. Her mother's hands, always warm, had been cold that day. Her voice quieter than usual. "Claire?" A pause. Then, "Don't ever let anyone convince you that you're not enough." Claire had smiled, believing she understood. She didn't, not until now. Because sitting here drowning in evidence, choking on the scale of Martin's betrayal, she saw it clearly. She had let him do exactly that. She had watched Martin sign papers. She had nodded when he said, "This is what your mother wanted." She had silenced her gut, swallowed her questions, played the good daughter. Because deep down, she had doubted herself. She had believed the lie that she wasn't strong enough to question him, that he knew best, that she was just grieving, just emotional. And now, $60 million was gone. But worse, so was her mother's voice, because she had stopped listening. Claire pressed a hand to her chest. She felt it there, where the pain lived, where the promise once sat. Now it echoed like an empty room. She whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry, Mom." And for the first time in days, she cried, not because she was weak, but because she finally remembered who she was. The sun had already set, but Claire hadn't moved from the office. The lamp on her mother's desk flickered softly, casting long shadows across the room. Her tea had gone cold. Her phone sat face down beside her. She stared at the last photo of Martin and Vivian for what felt like hours. Everything inside her wanted to scream, to throw something, to collapse. But instead, she reached for her phone. The last time she heard this name was in a whispered conversation outside a hospital door. Her mother's voice, weak but clear, "If anything ever happens, call Ray Morrison." Claire had nodded back then, not knowing she would need it. Not knowing she'd hesitate for days before daring to dial. Now she didn't hesitate. She pulled out the old business card her mother had tucked into a jewelry box. The corners were frayed, but the number was still there. She dialed. The ringing was long, too long. Claire almost hung up, but then, "Morrison." His voice was deep, calm, no nonsense. Claire took a breath, and for the first time since her mother's funeral, she chose not to stay silent. "Mr. Morrison, my name is Claire Whitmore. My mother, Cordelia, told me to call you. I think I found something. Actually, I think I found everything." There was a pause. Then his voice came back low but steady. "I'm listening." They met 2 days later, a quiet booth in a diner off King Street, red leather seats, cheap coffee, and the kind of silence that only comes when truth is about to surface. Claire hadn't slept. She stirred her coffee more than she drank it. Morrison sat across from her, tall, gray-haired coat still damp from the rain. He placed a worn manila folder on the table. "You sure you want to know?" he asked, his voice even. "Once we open this, there's no going back." Claire nodded. He opened the file. The first photo was already too much. Martin standing outside a luxury penthouse, his hand wrapped around Vivian Lockhart's waist. Claire looked away, but Morrison kept going. "She's not the only one," he said quietly. He laid out 5 more folders, each marked with a woman's name: Angela Morrison, Rachel DeMart, Elena Soto, Lillian Reed, Sarah Klein. Claire blinked. Her hands trembled slightly. 10 years, Morrison said, flipping through the documents. 10 years of calculated theft, 5 women, maybe more, all funded the same way: small transfers, false invoices, fake consulting contracts, all under your mother's name. Each woman had a pattern: vacation homes, cars, wire transfers, jewelry, quiet exits. One by one, Claire read the evidence. Her mother's trust account paid for someone's honeymoon in Bali. Her childhood home's equity funded a luxury SUV in Aspen. The emergency medical fund her mother set up was used to buy a painting in Paris. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a man who made a mistake. This was a system. Cold, planned, profitable. A slow bleed over a decade until Cordelia Whitmore's life's work had turned into sand. Claire didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Did she know?" Morrison looked at her. His eyes softened. "I don't think she wanted to." The cafe was nearly empty, save for a waitress counting tips and a drunk man asleep in a booth near the window. Claire and Morrison sat in a corner where no one could hear them. The rain outside tapped against the glass in slow, rhythmic patterns like a ticking clock she couldn't turn off. Morrison placed a second manila folder on the table, this one thinner but somehow heavier. Inside, names, dates, account numbers, wire transfers, receipts. A slow rot documented. "You said you wanted the truth," Morrison said, not unkindly, "but the truth comes with a price." Claire stared at the pages, at one name in particular, Lillian Reed. Another woman Martin had promised forever. Another lie, backed by Claire's inheritance. "He's going to fight you," Morrison said, leaning forward. "He's going to smile, gaslight, call you sweetheart, make you feel crazy." Claire didn't flinch. "And when that doesn't work," he continued, "he might try something worse." She looked up, voice steady. "I don't care. I'm not walking away." Morrison gave a single nod. He slid a piece of paper across the table. "Then sign this. It gives me permission to dig deeper, to subpoena the offshore records, the hidden foundations. The women who were paid to disappear." Claire picked up the pen. Her hand didn't tremble this time. It was 12:04 a.m., the kind of hour where even the wind forgets to move. Martin Hargrove sat alone in his study, dim light, glass of scotch in one hand, his laptop open to a private banking portal. On the screen, Cordelia Legacy Trust, Vivian Lockhart, LLC, pending amount $2 million. All he had to do was click confirm. He chuckled to himself. "Sweet little Claire," he whispered. "So busy playing detective, she forgot the game ended years ago." His finger hovered above the mouse. Click. Nothing. The page froze. Then, error 403, unauthorized transaction. Martin blinked, clicked again. Still nothing. Then his phone lit up. One new email from Morrison Investigations. Subject, final notice, the trust has been locked. Legal counsel has been informed. Attached a PDF. Every transaction, every name, every forged signature. Martin's jaw tightened. He muttered something ugly under his breath. Then came a second notification. Email from Claire Whitmore. Subject, you taught me well, but you underestimated me. Claire sat frozen. The screen glowed coldly in the dark, her hands trembling over the keyboard. She'd broken into a private folder, one Martin thought no one would ever find. Inside, a chain of emails, encrypted, labeled D-Lock, sent 2 days ago. Her heart pounded as she read, Martin Hargrove to Dahlia Lockhart. Claire's digging around, but it doesn't matter. She's too naive to stop me. We'll move everything before she figures it out. Naive. That word sliced through her like glass. He hadn't just betrayed her mother. He mocked her, dismissed her, like she was a child playing at war. Claire leaned back, blinking away the heat behind her eyes. Then she whispered to herself, let's see how naive I am when the judge reads that out loud in court. Claire moved like a soldier preparing for war. Flash drive in one hand, scanner whirring beside her. Each page, financial records, email threads, birth dates, offshore accounts went in one by one. She wasn't backing down anymore. Once everything was uploaded, she opened a blank document. She typed, if I disappear, if anything happens to me, publish everything in this folder. Send it to the press, to the police, to every woman who ever trusted Martin Hargrove. She saved the folder with a name no one would ignore, Cord Phoenix. Then she encrypted it and sent it to 5 different email addresses: lawyers, journalists, Detective Morrison. Claire exhaled deeply. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice wasn't. This wasn't fear anymore. It was strategy. The knock came at 12:17 a.m. Claire didn't move. She already knew who it was. Through the peephole, Martin standing tall in his navy coat, and behind him, Dahlia, wrapped in fur, clutching a leather folder. Claire opened the door halfway. Martin gave that familiar, mocking smile. "Let us in, sweetheart. We need to talk. It's about the estate." Claire said nothing. She stepped aside. Inside, Martin laid the folder on her dining table. Dahlia didn't speak. Her eyes scanned the room nervously. Martin flipped open the folder. "These are updated documents. They'll simplify the transfer of what's left. All legal, all tidy." Claire crossed her arms, her voice calm. "You forged my mother's signature." Martin's smile didn't flinch. "You can't prove that." She tilted her head. "You're right. I don't need to." Martin leaned in closer, voice low, dangerous. "You don't have the nerve, Claire. You think this little game of yours scares me?" Claire stared at him, unblinking. Then she pointed to the bookshelf. A tiny red light blinked. A hidden camera streaming everything. Martin froze. Dahlia gasped. Claire's voice cut through the silence. "This isn't a game. It's evidence." Claire placed the envelope on the table. Yellowed with time. Handwriting, elegant, familiar. It simply read, "For Claire. To be opened when you no longer hear my voice." The room went silent. She opened it with steady fingers. Cordelia's voice came alive on the page. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone, and he's still pretending. Martin was the one thing I got wrong. I chose charm over truth, and for that, I'm sorry. But this isn't just apology, it's armor." Inside the envelope are 2 things: a notarized letter I signed, warning of financial fraud, and copies of accounts I never showed him. Protect these. Protect yourself, and protect the name I leave you, Whitmore. Claire swallowed hard. Martin shifted in his chair. Detective Morrison, standing nearby, gave a slow nod. The notary opened the second envelope and paled. Claire raised her head, her voice unwavering. "My mother didn't leave me money. She left me clarity, and enough fire to burn your lies down, Martin." Martin laughed. "Clarity. Evidence. This is just a grieving girl lashing out. None of this holds in court." He stood up, straightened his jacket, ready to walk out. Then, a click. A voice. "Actually, it holds perfectly well." Everyone turned. At the doorway stood Margaret Halberd, Cordelia's lifelong friend. She held a small black recorder in her hand. "I recorded the entire conversation. The threats, the forged documents, the confession. You never saw me in the hallway, did you, Martin?" Martin's face drained of color. "You little—" "Careful," Morrison interrupted, stepping forward. "You're already dancing on the edge of obstruction." Margaret stepped beside Claire, placed the recorder on the table like a crown. "Cordelia was my best friend, and I promised her if anything happened, I'd protect Claire, even if it meant standing up to the devil himself." Claire exhaled, slowly. Her eyes glistened, but not with fear. Martin sat down, hard, for the first time, defeated. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "We're here to read the final will and testament of Cordelia Ann Whitmore Hargrove." Martin leaned back, arms crossed. He was already smiling. Claire sat quietly, a thin envelope in her lap. Dahlia painted her nails behind him. The lawyer began. "To Martin Hargrove, my husband," Martin's smile widened, "I leave the signed letter in the safe which details your 10-year affair with Vivian Lockhart and outlines the misappropriation of over $60 million. The room froze. Martin leaned forward. "What?" The lawyer didn't pause. These actions are grounds for full disinheritance. Claire looked up, her voice cut like glass. You thought she didn't know. The lawyer continued. To my daughter Claire Whitmore I leave my love, my name, and my faith. And I instruct that all remaining assets be transferred to the Cordelia Whitmore Foundation for Betrayed Women, a fund created to protect those who loved and were left with nothing. Dahlia dropped the nail polish. It shattered across the floor. Martin stood, jaw clenched. You're bluffing. The notary spoke calm but firm. It's all legal. Signed, filed, witnessed. You get nothing, Mr. Hargrove. Martin's smirk was gone. Martin's voice thundered. I am her husband. You can't erase that with one letter. The lawyer didn't flinch. Your marriage is recognized. So is your betrayal. Martin slammed a fist on the table. She was mine. From the corner, Dahlia began to back away. Her eyes scanned the room like a trapped animal. Claire turned to her calm. You knew, didn't you, that the money wasn't his? Dahlia's breath quickened. She clutched her purse, heels clicking backwards. Then she ran through the doors, down the marble hallway, and vanished. Martin watched her go, stunned. Dahlia, come back! No response. The notary folded the final page. Due to infidelity and financial misconduct, Mr. Hargrove's appeal is inadmissible under state law. Martin's voice cracked. I gave her everything. My time, my name. Claire's voice steady. And she gave you a second chance. You burned it. Silence. Then the final blow from Margaret. You broke the heart of a woman who would have died for you. Martin sat down again. This time, he didn't get back up. 6 months later, the gala sparkled under a sky of golden chandeliers. The Cordelia Whitmore Foundation was now real, and so was Claire's voice. She stood on stage, confident, calm, radiant. This foundation is for every woman told, you're not enough. The crowd applauded, but in the back, Martin stood in the shadows, gaunt, pale, alone. Claire saw him. She stepped down slowly, heels silent on velvet carpet, face to face. He opened his mouth, but she spoke first. Remember what you said to me, Martin? You get nothing. She leaned closer. Now look at you. No home, no name, no one. He said nothing. Only the silence of a man who had lost more than money. Claire walked away. Her final words lingered behind her like perfume. You laughed at me. Now you have nothing. The sun spilled through the stained glass windows of the new Cordelia Whitmore Foundation. The walls were soft ivory, the smell of fresh paint still lingering. But at the heart of it all, above a quiet fireplace, was a portrait of Cordelia. Warm eyes, a smile that never stopped believing. Claire stood beneath it. For the first time in months, she felt still. Dozens of women filled the lobby. Some had bruises, some had silence, but all had stories. Claire addressed them, voice low but strong. This place was born from betrayal, but it will grow from truth. You're not broken, you're not alone. A volunteer passed her a cup of tea. The steam rose quietly like a beginning. Behind her, Cordelia's photo watched on, not as a memory, but as a vow fulfilled. 6 months later. The Cordelia Whitmore Foundation's winter gala shimmered with light and laughter. Claire, draped in a deep navy gown, shook hands with donors and survivors. A string quartet played something soft and forgiving. Justice Tonight wore elegance. But across the street, under a flickering lamppost, stood Martin Hargrove. No suit, no smile, just an old coat 2 sizes too big and the weight of shame hanging off his shoulders. He watched the light, watched Claire. She felt it. Turned her head. Their eyes met. 1 second, maybe 2. Then Claire turned back to her guests. She didn't need his apology, didn't crave his guilt. He had to live in the ruins he built, and she had already walked beyond them. Later that night, the guests had gone. Only a soft piano tune played in the empty hall of the foundation. Claire stood alone beneath her mother's portrait. Candlelight danced on Cordelia's smile. She whispered, barely audible, "I kept my promise, Mom. I didn't let him win." There was no courtroom, no gavel, no verdict read aloud. But justice had been served, not in headlines, but in quiet resilience, not in vengeance, but in dignity reclaimed. Martin Hargrove would live the rest of his life not as a villain brought to justice, but as a man so disgraced the world no longer listened when he spoke. Claire took a breath, not out of anger, not out of grief, but out of peace. Because sometimes the loudest justice is the silence of those who failed you. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a judge's robe or make headlines. It shows up in the quiet strength to walk away, in the courage to tell the truth, and in the dignity of not sinking to their level. Claire didn't win by destroying Martin, she won by rebuilding herself. And that's the kind of victory no one can steal. Let this be your reminder. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And your healing, that's justice too. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think about your own strength, subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Because every voice deserves to be heard, and every story deserves justice. Hit the subscribe button and don't forget to turn on the bell so you never miss what truly matters.